Giles Corey was a wizard strong, a stubborn wretch was he, and fit was he to hang on high upon the locust tree. So when before the magistrates for trial he did come, he would no true confession make, but was completely dumb. Giles Corey, said the magistrate, what hast thou here to plead to those who now accuse thy soul of crime and horrid deed? Giles Corey, he said not a word, no single word spoke he. Giles Corey, said the magistrate, we'll press it out of thee. They got them then a heavy beam, then laid it on his breast. They loaded it with heavy stones, and hard upon him pressed. More weight, now, said this wretched man, more weight, again he cried. And he did no confession make, but wickedly he died. Hi.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to a very special episode of
The Haunted Heart Podcast. So it should be obvious from our introductory literature that we are going to delve into a very special topic today. The Salem Witchcraft Trials.
Yes.
We wanted to do something super special for our 31st episode, so we are attempting to tackle this monumental topic.
This beast.
I am very excited to get this episode recorded so that this is not all in my head, because I am alienating my family. However, before we jump into the topic, we do have a very, very special new member to induct into our party on the Patreon.
Party on the Patreon.
Isn't that like the tune of like an 80s song? I wanna party on the Patreon.
I don't
We're gonna
think
work on
so,
that.
but yeah.
I think that was the tune to Electric Avenue for anybody who is an 80s music fanatic. That's what that was. Anyway, today we are going to light a candle and we are going to invoke our friend Jenny G, who is our newest cannibal cult member. Jenny G, your candle is lit, and it will sit right beside me and my mic, and I will not knock it over. We have dressed this candle with good intentions, goodwill, and prosperity for you and yours, and we welcome you wholeheartedly into our cannibal cult.
Yes. And remember, your candle will be lit through the episode, but always and forever in our hearts.
All right, so let's get into this episode. Of course, everyone knows about the Salem Witch Trial, pretty much. We literally learned about it in high school.
Mm-hmm.
It was the deadliest witch hunt in the history of the United States.
Yes, it was.
It took place between February 1692 and May 1693, and more than 200 people were accused of being witches. 19 people were found guilty. I have guilty in air quotes because, of course, most of these people were not witches at all. And those 19 people were executed. 14 women were hanged, or 14 women and 5 men were hanged. 5 people, at least, died in jail. That's a conservative number. And one other man, otherwise known as Giles Corey, was pressed to death for refusing to plead.
And you forgot 2 dogs.
2 dogs.
Two
yes.
dogs.
2 dogs. Sorry to the animal lovers out there. According to historian George Lincoln Burr, the Salem Witchcraft Trials was the rock on which theocracy was shattered forever in this country. This was when we kind of saw that having a government based on a religion is probably not a good idea, even if it was a good religion.
No, not a good idea. Shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Shouldn't do the things that we were trying to run away from.
Yeah, right?
And and then do that. Very ironic.
Yes. Yes. Shouldn't run away from a country that has no freedom of religion or separation of church and state, and then start a new country with no freedom of religion or separation of church and state. But that's actually a misconception. We're taught that the Puritans left the old country because they were looking for freedom of religion. They were not. They were looking for freedom for their religion and their religion only.
True.
So they were definitely assholes to people who were other religions.
True.
As we shall see.
Yes, as we'll dive into.
Yes. So did you want to take us through some of the inciting incidents and kind of lay down an overview for us?
Yes.
So that we're all on the same page to investigate this thing?
Yes. So most of you pretty much know these facts already. So I didn't go into a great depth of detail, but I've got a few bullet points here. So we know that Salem was a puritanical society. So these people were bound pretty severely to biblical ideals, one of which is the idea that witches and witchcraft is a product of the devil.
Yes.
Salem itself was a town that had a lot of problems at this point. We were experiencing a mini ice age that caused a lot of economic deterioration within Salem. And there was a lot of conflicts happening between Salem Village and Salem Town, which most people may not know were actually two separate entities. Mm. Salem Village is considered to be modern-day Danvers, Massachusetts. Salem Town is what we currently know as Salem.
Can you imagine, like, being a resident of Danvers and, like, being perpetually, eternally pissed that, like, you don't have, like, the moniker of Salem?
Right.
Then people are like, oh, the Salem Witch Trials. Oh, they happened in Salem. And then Danvers is just like, but what about us?
But what about us?
But what about us?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, most people don't realize that. That's where it all started, was actually in Salem Village. So, in February of 1962, we've got 9-year-old Betty Paris and her cousin, 11-year-old Abigail Williams. They began to experience strange fits. These fits were described as being anything past that of biological explanation. They screamed, threw things, contorted their bodies into strange ways, and would utter strange sounds. Sounds like me trying to get up in the morning, though.
Yeah. I mean, I've been there. Strange fits. Yep.
Just contorting your body. I mean, just think about it. Like, just stretching.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to say.
I mean, I do that at multiple points during the day. I make people uncomfortable at the gym. It's fine.
Yeah. So, soon after, several other girls in Salem Village began to experience similar fits, often bursting out during sermons with the complaints of being pricked or pinched. It was a local doctor, presumably William Griggs, who first suggested bewitchment as a cause after he failed to find anything physically wrong with them. These girls were key in the false accusations of village members such as Tituba, Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Good, and many others. Now, these people were most likely not practitioners of witchcraft, as we have stated, but they were accused of witchcraft because of the way they dressed, spoke, or even because they simply had a conflict with someone else.
True. Or their ethnicity.
Yeah.
Obviously. Racism. It's an American tradition.
It really is. It for real is. So this becomes a strain on the local courts. So they decide to set up the Court of Oyer and Terminer, which was designed specifically to host cases of witchcraft. And I am going to delve into Our Lady, our witch number 1.
Well, actually, just to provide a little bit of background on the court itself. So although many Americans associate the Salem Witch Trials with like the ultimate witch hunt because it's the biggest witch hunt that we've ever experienced here, witch hunting, you know, synonym.
Same, yeah.
Basically the same. Witch hunting was all the rage in the 15th, 16th, and early 17th centuries in Europe. So it's a tradition that European settlers carried over from Europe But it had begun to fade out by the mid-17th century when Salem happens, like in the late 17th century. So they were a little bit off trend.
They were not
with their
on
winch hunting.
Yes.
So, New World authors such as Joseph Glanville were obsessed with witchcraft, and they kept the witch hunting spirit alive way after it had died out in Europe. In Glanville's work Against Modern Sadducism, which came out in 1668, he claimed that to deny the existence of witches and apparitions was to deny the existence of God as well. And you know our Puritans can't have that. So for the Puritans, and for many people who were alive at this time, demons, witches, devils, all of that was as real to them as anything else. So it was very literal, and it was very, like, immediate. If you had a dream that a demon appeared to you, it wasn't a metaphor, it wasn't a symbol, as we kind of take those things now. It was literal. A literal demon had just rolled up in your bedroom.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to them, you can't have God without the devil.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And to deny the devil would be essentially to deny God,
which is a big, big no-no.
Yes.
So now we can delve into our...
Yes. So
our first witch.
At this point, you get people, it's kind of like an Oprah show. You're a witch. You're a witch. You're a witch. You're all witches. That's kind of what we have going on right now, right? But our very first one, our witch number one, was a lady by the name of Bridget Bishop. She is described as a singular character that cannot easily be described. She was born sometime
That's how I want to be described.
Yeah. She is not easily described.
She cannot be described.
She cannot be described.
MySpace about me is not easily described.
I feel
Period.
like that
That's
was your MySpace description at one point.
I think my MySpace description was like some 2-line poem written by some obscure internet author. It was heavy. It was heavy.
Going back to Goth Katie.
If anyone can find my MySpace, send it to me.
Oh, God.
I'm pretty sure it was like myspace.com/rocker49 or something weird like that. And I have the number 49 has no significance to me whatsoever.
Rocker49.
I think it was like rocker_49.
Sure, it wasn't like myspace.com/
Cynical Lady
in Red.
No, I think that one was taken. It's fine. No, I think it was like rocker_49 or some bullshit like that. Anyway,
Okay.
Back to 1692.
Back to Bridget, yeah. Where they did not have MySpace.
They did not.
So she was born sometime between 1632 and 1637. She had been married 3 times. Her third...
Ooh.
Right.
Did they die? Or did she...
Well,
they must have died.
Well, yes. So her third and final marriage after the deaths of her first 2 husbands was to Edward Bishop, who was employed as a lumber worker. And she appears to have had no children in any of her marriages.
Okay.
So although Bishop had been accused by more individuals of witchcraft than any other witchcraft defendant, it was not so much her acts of witchcraft that caused her to be the first witch hanged in Salem, as it was her flamboyant lifestyle and exotic manner of dress.
Okay.
Despite being a member of Mr. Hale's church in Beverly, where she remained a member in good standing until her death, Bishop often kept the gossip mill busy with stories of her publicly fighting with her various husbands, entertaining guests in home until late in the night, drinking and playing the forbidden game of shovelboard, apparently. Apparently that was forbidden.
Okay.
And being the mistress of 2 thriving taverns in town. Some even went
I genuinely enjoy her.
Right. She sounds like a good time. Some even went so far as to say that Bishop's dubious moral character and shameful conduct caused discord to arise in other families, and young people were in danger of corruption. Bishop's blatant disregard for the respected standards of Puritan society made her a prime target for accusations of witchcraft. Mm-hmm. In addition to her somewhat outrageous, now we're talking like by Puritan standards here,
yeah.
her outrageous lifestyle, the fact that Bishop was in the habit of dressing more artistically than women of the village also contributed in large part to her conviction and execution. She was described as wearing a black cap and a black hat and a red paragon bodice bordered and looped with different colors.
Okay.
She sounds fashionable.
She sounds like fashion.
She's got some fashion sense, right?
She does. She sounds like fashion.
But this was a showy costume, right, for the times.
Okay.
Aside from the encouraging rumors and social disdain.
A showy costume.
It was. This showy
That should be the
costume
episode
is
title.
how it's described. A showy costume was used as evidence against her at her trial for witchcraft. In his deposition, Shattuck, the town dyer, mentions, and this is as corroborative proof of Bishop being a witch, that she used to bring his dye house, quote, sundry pieces of lace of shapes and dimensions entirely outside his conceptions of what would be needed in the wardrobe of a plain and honest woman. Sounds like she was trying to get her
lace panties.
right. That sounds like she's trying to get some lace panties dyed.
Okay.
She had them. She bought them in a respectable off-white color. I'm sure of the times.
Yeah, because that's probably all they sold.
And she wanted them in a red, maybe,
She wanted some black panties.
or some black. She wanted them dyed.
Everybody needs some black panties.
Right.
I stand by a pair of black panties.
So,
Tried and true.
but this
Old trusty.
But this, or these like costumes or fashionable apparel, was regarded by the Puritans as a snare and a sign of the devil. So, on April 18th of 1962, when a warrant was issued for Bishop's arrest for witchcraft, she was no stranger to the courthouse by then. In 1680, she had been charged.
Again, a phrase that I would like to have in my
She was no
my
stranger.
space.
She was no stranger to the courthouse, honey. In 1680, she had been charged but cleared of witchcraft. And on other occasions, she had ended up in the courthouse for violent public quarreling, again with her husband. Bishop had never seen or met any of her accusers until her questioning. While several of the afflicted girls cried out and writhed in the supposed pain that she was causing them, John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin questioned her, although she was little doubt in either their minds as to her guilt. So they questioned her. She denied it, obviously. She claimed her innocence, saying, "I am innocent. I know nothing of it. I have done no witchcraft. I am as innocent as the child unborn." I don't know about that, though, girl. Girl, like, I'm with you and I support you, but I think that was that was a little far-fetched.
I feel like a little bit more honest would be like, Your Honor, I like to get down, but I ain't no witch, babe.
Listen, I just wanted some black panties. I like black panties.
You just gotta have them. Ain't no Victoria's Secret here. Ain't no delicates, specialty boutique stores here.
No.
I just gotta take this cloth over to this little man and let him dye these panties. Girl, just dye them yourself.
Right.
Get a little Pinterest on it. Like,
Right.
come on.
That should have told you right then and there she wasn't a witch. Damn, a true witch maybe would have just dyed them herself.
For
black.
sure, honey. We ain't gonna pay nobody nothing that we can
Right.
do our fucking selves. We made Pinterest.
Exactly. So, when asked by one of her jailers, Bishop claimed that she was not troubled to see the afflicted persons so tormented and could not tell what to think of them and did not concern herself about them at all. That sounds like you, Katie.
I feel it.
What do you think about these poor girls writhing in pain? I don't know. What the fuck?
Honey, have some water. Are you
Shit they
dehydrated?
own. But the afflicted girls were not Bishop's only accusers. Her sister's husband claimed that, quote, she sat up all night conversing with the devil and that the devil came bodily into her. I bet he did, girl. With a whole town against her, Bishop was charged, tried, and executed within 8 days. On June 10th, as crowds gathered to watch, she was taken to Gallows Hill and executed by the sheriff, George Corwin. She displayed no remorse and professed her innocence at her execution. the last words that she muttered was, "You will keep silent," right before she was hanged and killed. So, Bishop's death did not go unnoticed in Salem. The court took a short recess. Accusations slowed down for a minute, for about a month, actually, before they were reinstated. And one of the judges, Nathaniel Saltonstall, resigned, having become dissatisfied with the court's methods. Even Governor Phipps had doubts about the methods of the court and went to Boston to consult the ministers there as to what should be done with the rest of the accused. Unfortunately for the 18 others who would be hanged as witches, in addition to the one pressed to death, and the several who died in prison, the ministers decidedly and earnestly recommended that the proceedings should be, quote, vigorously carried on. And so they were.
Yeah, so you had these ministers are like a big influence, obviously, on this whole thing, right?
Yes.
So you have these girls who are acting crazy out of their minds, right? And they're like young, right?
These are 9 years old, 11 years old.
You're dealing with kids who are like, they haven't even hit puberty yet. And so the thing about kids is, if you give them attention, they'll keep doing the stuff to get the attention. Because kids love attention.
Yes.
And if you think about it, you're in a puritanical society. You work hard all day. In those days, kids were just extra farmhands that you didn't have to fucking pay, and you barely had to feed. It wasn't like things are today, where our kids are like these weird, I guess I shouldn't call it weird, but like our kids are cherished and loved, and we have kids because we want to have kids, and we have kids because we want them to dream and grow up and become like people in the world and carry on our line and blah blah blah. Back in those days, you had kids because you had to work a fucking farm.
Right. You needed the help, honey.
And they were free labor. So you have to imagine that these kids aren't necessarily getting attention lavished on them, especially in a puritanical society. You also have girls who are of that age where they're starting to have lots of weird changes in their bodies, and they're starting to feel lots of strange things that in a puritanical society you're not necessarily taught how to deal with.
I feel like there should have been like a Salem late 1700s PBS special on TV. We used to list
on the magic box of pictures.
On the magic picture box. Yeah. Oh God. Could you imagine trying to teach children about puberty and sex and stuff from a TV back then?
Yeah.
Dead.
No. So it's basically, the point here is that it's a very weird time for these kids, and they're in a society that isn't necessarily gentle when it comes to kids having a difficult time. So, they're having these episodes, whether it's genuine or whether it's not, whichever way you believe, they're getting attention for it. And so that's sort of feeding itself. But then the other side of the story is you have these ministers who are all grown men, and they are all men, definitely. Definitely men.
Definitely a man.
And they are sort of feeding into this history, that we talked about of witch hunting. This thing that has, at this point, fallen out of favor, but they're leaning really hard on the old traditions of witch hunting. If you have never heard of the Malleus Maleficarum, it is a book that was written in the 1400s, I believe. I think it was 1458. I'm not 100% sure on the year. But it was written in the 1400s. It's about witch hunting.
Yes.
It is the prototype of the witch hunting text.
Yes.
And at one point in time, in the 15th and 16th centuries, it was surpassed in popularity only by the Bible. So this is a huge, of course, we don't hear about it now. Stuff like that gets buried. But witch hunting was a huge deal. The significance of it cannot be overstated. So they're leaning on texts like the Malleus Maleficarum in this whole trial process. And one of the, main figures in particular that influenced this thing, that I truly believe the witch trials would not have gone the way that they did and would not have blown up the way that they did were it not for this character, and that is Cotton Mather.
Yes.
So if you've ever read a book on the witch trials, you've heard Cotton Mather's name tossed around. He's an integral player. Interestingly, he wasn't present for a lot of it, supposedly. That's hazy. So digging into Cotton Mather for a minute, just so you understand who this guy is, and I'm sure that you know who this guy is. Cotton Mather had daddy issues.
Ooh.
Despite his best efforts, Cotton never became quite as well known and successful in politics as his father. So his father was Increase Mather. And
Love that name.
I'm sorry if I'm like pronouncing that wrong, but I really couldn't find another.
No, I think it's Increase Mather.
Increase. I feel like there should be a rapper called Increase. Increase. It's kind of like DJ Khaled.
Like I was thinking
another one.
I was thinking like Beyonce's Upgrade You, but it's like Mather's Increase.
Mather's Increase. All the way up.
Let me increase you.
Yeah, it was a lot less sexy than that. But Increase Mather was a huge deal in the New World, in the Northeast in particular. He was a politician. He had written several pamphlets, and he was the type of dude who people respected. Cotton was always in his father's footsteps, and he tried really, really hard to create a career of his own, and he was driven very much by that sense of competition with his father. You know this guy. You know the guy who feels like he's been upstaged by his older brother or his dad, and his whole life is this fucking shit-tastic homage to the fact that he thinks he's not quite as good as them.
Yeah, he's plagued by insecurities.
Absolutely. That's what we're dealing with when we're looking at Cotton Mather. So Cotton publishes Memorable Providences, which is sort of like a novella thing, in 1689, which detailed the afflictions of several children in the Goodwin family in Boston. Goody Glover, who was a Catholic washerwoman who worked for the Goodwins, was eventually convicted of witchcraft and executed in this case. And Cotton played a huge role in it. Cotton actually lived with the Goodwins for a while. He observed the children. He observed supposed visitations by spirits and things of that nature in witchcraft. And he then wrote this book that was based off of his observations.
While he was staying with them.
Yes. And he believed that witches and devils were immortal souls. That's what he called them, immortal souls. And he believed that witches appeared spectrally as themselves. And appearing spectrally, if nobody knows about like astral projection and things like that, it's basically where I, sitting in this room recording the podcast with Kenny, close my eyes and think really hard, and I can project my own image perhaps into your bedroom to do a little dance for you and blow your kiss. I'm not going to hurt you.
Be on the lookout for that tonight, guys.
Not going to hurt you. Only gonna share some love.
I'll just sit in the corner and stare at you.
God, that's worse. I'm not sure which one's worse. Yes, so we have this belief in witches appearing spectrally. That'll become important later, and it'll come up a couple times. So Memorable Providences is thought to have laid the groundwork for the Salem Witch Trials, which happened 3 years later, 3 years after this whole Goodwin family incident. Cotton was influential in the construction of the court for the trials from the beginning. Cotton Mather had basically gotten the incredibly unpopular Lieutenant Governor, William Stoughton, his job due to Cotton's connections with his powerful father. And as such, Cotton had considerable influence over Stoughton. One of the quotations from one of the, spectators was that intercession, it says, it's, quote, intercession has been made by Cotton Mather for the advancement of Stoughton, a man of cold affections, proud, self-willed, and covetous of distinction, end quote. So it's pretty clear that Stoughton was not the coolest dude.
No.
And Cotton kind of pulled some strings, got Daddy to pull some strings.
Yeah.
And slipped him on into Lieutenant Governor. So Cotton kind of had Stoughton's ear. After this whole hullabaloo with the Salem Witch Trials is over, Cotton claimed not to have attended any trials in Salem. He kind of washes his hands of it and steps away. But...
Bastard.
All throughout the trials, Cotton Mather publicized and praised the trials, writing, quote, "If in the midst of many dissatisfaction among us, the publication of these trials may promote such a pious thankfulness unto God for justice being so executed among us, I shall rejoice that God is glorified."
You know what he is?
End quote.
He's a fuckboy.
He is. He is a fuckboy. He is the proto-fuckboy. Absolutely.
Proto-fuckboy. Love it.
Absolutely. Around the same time, Cotton Mather also wrote The Wonders of the Invisible World, which praised how carefully the court was managing the Salem Witch Trials.
What is this thing with writing? And it's like you could write a pamphlet. Like you said, he wrote a pamphlet.
Yeah, like I think.
Can I write a pamphlet?
Yeah, I think maybe that is the equivalent of like a Facebook, like a long Facebook post, like a Facebook note nowadays.
It's
Or
like
a
let's put all of our
blog.
thoughts into this pamphlet and like pass it around.
Oh my gosh, it's a blog.
It is.
It was their equivalent of a blog. And they had time to do shit like that. Like way back when, people would write like novels in like a couple months. Because they didn't fucking have all these distractions that we have.
Right.
And they, oh well. I like 2018 and not being burned as a witch, so or hung. So that's the type of shit that Cotton Mather's doing. Clearly he was in Boston, so he was definitely one of those priests, or not priests, this is not Catholicism. He was one of those preachers, ministers who Kenny was talking about, that some of the folks from Salem went up to Boston to get feedback from.
Yes.
And Cotton Mather was there, and he wanted to fucking hang all the witches.
Well, this was, I'm assuming, was like his moment.
Yes.
He thought,
yes,
my moment.
yes.
He saw the stars and the clouds part, and he saw God hand him this opportunity down, and he said, I will finally be better than Daddy.
Fine. Yes. So, despite Cotton Mather's claim that he never attended any of the witch trials, Robert Califf, a contemporary of Cotton, wrote the following regarding his participation at the public execution of George Burroughs, which was held on August 16th, 1692. So this is an eyewitness firsthand account of Cotton Mather at an execution.
At an execution.
Which he said he never did.
That he was there and he attended.
Quote, Mr. Burroughs was carried in a cart with the others through the streets of Salem to execution. When he was upon the ladder, he made a speech for the clearing of his innocency with such solemn and serious expressions as were to the admiration of all present. His prayer, which he concluded by repeating the Lord's Prayer, and I'm going to end quote here because one of the big beliefs about witches was that they could not utter prayer. And of course, George Burroughs utters a prayer and then the full Lord's Prayer on the gallows to be hanged.
Yeah.
So, back into the quote here. Burroughs' repetition of the Lord's Prayer was so well worded and uttered with such composedness, as such fervency of spirit, as was very affecting, and drew tears from many, so that it seemed to some that spectators would hinder the execution. The accusers said the black man, the devil, stood and dictated to him. As soon as he was turned off, hanged, Mr. Cotton Mather, being mounted upon a horse, directed himself to the people, partly to declare that he, Mr. Burroughs, was no ordained minister, partly to possess the people of his guilt, saying that the devil often had been transformed into the angel of light, and this did somewhat appease the people, and the executions went on. When he, Mr. Burroughs, was cut down, he was dragged by a halter to a hole or grave between rocks about 2 feet deep. His shirt and breeches were pulled off, and an old pair of trousers of one executed put on his lower parts. He was so put in, together with John Willard and Martha Carrier, that one of his hands and his chin and a foot of one of them was left uncovered. End quote. Mm-hmm. So you can definitely see how, and this is a thing that happens throughout these trials, rules are made like, well, witches can't pray. They can't say a prayer.
Right.
And then an accused witch says a prayer. with no problem, and her flesh doesn't melt off her face. And so then we just make a new rule.
Yes.
Oh, well, the devil was possessing them and allowing them to say this prayer.
Right. I think it's important to note that at this point we have seen a couple of times where we could have, or even as a community, Salem could have stood up for something, you know, like even after the first witch was hung, or quote witch, when Bridget was hung, and everybody sort of stood back in shock, but they did nothing.
Right.
And then this, when you have Burroughs, who was he was essentially, by all accounts, a man of God.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, he was a former minister.
Yes.
Reciting a Lord's Prayer. We see that. We do nothing.
Right. And people accept the justification that, oh, well, the devil must have allowed them to do that. The devil must have possessed them and allowed them to do it.
Right.
You know, so there's that theory of like the evolving witch that is going throughout the witch trials.
It's just
instead of people stopping to think, maybe we're wrong.
Right.
Maybe we're just wrong.
Well, I think at that point you probably don't want to be wrong.
Yeah, because you've murdered.
You've murdered so many people, and you don't want to be wrong.
Yes, yeah.
Whether, you know, you have powers that be who are pulling the strings, or even just you as a viewer of the community.
Yeah.
You don't want it to be true that this is happening because of, you know, anything other than what people are saying it is, which is witchcraft and the devil.
And they deserve to die.
And they deserve to die.
Yeah. At that point, everybody has bought in because these are public executions. People are, you know, it's a very participatory thing. It's not something that's being done in the dark. It's not something that's being, you know, hidden from people. It's very public. So everybody is bought in at this point. And if we're wrong at this point, then we are fucking murderers, all of us.
Yeah.
So despite the fact that Cotton Mather, again, after this whole thing is over, he ducks tail and runs and pretends he has nothing to do with this. On September 2nd, 1692, after 11 accused witches had been executed, Cotton Mather wrote a letter to Chief Justice William Stoughton congratulating him on, quote, extinguishing of as wonderful a piece of devilism as has been seen in the world.
That's some fucked up shit.
End quote. Yes. Yeah. So clearly he's bought into this. Clearly he's thinking this is his big moment, that he can be some sort of spiritual guide for these people who are self-imploding. And maybe for him, it was just a way to manifest his frustration at feeling inadequate.
Yeah.
In a small village.
Yeah.
That was easy to stoke up the wildfire flames in.
Right.
So throughout the trials, we have a couple different types of evidence or tests that are used. And there were a ton of them, but we'll just talk about a couple. So we talked about spectral evidence.
Yes.
Spectral evidence, just to give you a quick definition, spectral evidence refers to the testimony of the afflicted who claim to see apparitions or shapes of the person who was allegedly afflicting them. It'd be like if I accused Kenny of witchcraft against me, and I had told them that, you know, every night when I go to bed, I'd see Kenny, an image of Kenny doing the Macarena in my bedroom.
Right.
This evidence was very speculative, obviously, and we'll kind of get into that a bit later. But the other big thing was the witch cake. So sometime in February 1692, likely after the afflictions began, but before specific names were mentioned, a neighbor of Reverend Paris, whose name was Mary Sibley, instructed John Indian, one of the minister's slaves, to make a witch cake. She intended to use traditional English white magic to discover the identity of the witch who was afflicting the girls. Now, let's go through that one more time.
English white magic.
Mary Sibley intended to use traditional English white magic to discover the identity of the witch who was afflicting the girl.
Yeah.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch?
Or a bad witch. Yeah, I think.
Did you ever notice that she asked her that question after she tells her that bad witches are ugly?
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, a good one or a bad one?
Savage.
Yeah, I think this was something that was really interesting to me because, and I got some things on this as well, but it's like, how is this, you're accusing all these people for
Right.
random things of witchcraft, like, wearing a colorful corset or whatever.
Right.
But this bitch over here who is like making witch cakes,
Yeah.
or instructing people to do witch cakes,
Yes.
she's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine.
It's white magic. It's good magic,
English
right?
white magic.
Good English magic.
Good English white
Yeah,
magic.
we Scottish can tell you a little bit about that fucking English magic. Anywho. So Mary Sibley intended to use this witch cake to discover the identity of the witch who was afflicting the girls. The cake was made of rye meal and urine from the afflicted girls, and it was fed to a dog. According to English folk, to the English folks' understanding of how witches accomplished affliction, when the dog ate the cake, the witch herself would be hurt. So you
Yes.
collect the pee from the afflicted, you make a fucking cake with rye meal, you feed it to a dog. When the dog eats that cake, the witch then is injured. Invisible particles that the witch had supposedly sent to afflict the girls were believed to remain in the girl's urine, and a woman's cries of pain when the dog ate the cake would identify her as the witch. So we feed this dog this cake, and then we just fucking get real quiet, and we just listen real hard.
Wait, just hope and pray that you didn't stub your toe at the moment they
Yeah.
did that,
For
or
real,
like
or that you're
cut
in
yourself.
childbirth.
You're in childbirth.
Fucking, you better a quiet place that shit up.
For real.
Just fucking, just shh, shh, hush, hush,
Hirsch.
yeah. So I would fail that test because
Yes,
I'm
you would.
literally never quiet.
Exactly.
So the third test that was used is the touch test. If the
Is that like with the doll, and it's like, where did they know?
show me where on the doll that they touched you.
Show me where the witch did her witchery.
Show me where.
Bitch, where?
Which where? I love it. Yeah. The touch test is basically, it is not the doll test. But it's if the accused witch touched the victim while the victim was having a fit and the fit stopped, observers believed that that meant the accused was the person who had afflicted the victim.
Oh, because that is like
So not fakeable,
so
right?
not, yeah, like, oh, that is concrete.
Oof. Yeah. Can you imagine the icy stares between the accused and the victim? Fuck. Bitch, you better keep having that fucking
God,
fit.
if you don't, you better keep having that fucking fit, bitch, or I'm gonna cut your ass.
Give you something to have a fit about.
Wait till I get out of jail, you fucking bitch.
You wait till I actually am freed from this husk of flesh and bone, and I am
will.
a
I'ma
spirit
tell you
who
what.
will fly through the night into your fucking bedroom and crawl into your eardrum and fuck your brain up and scramble your will.
Right, I would be like,
The whole courtroom's just silent.
I mean, they're hearing everything you're saying to them. It's like, I am not a witch, but bitch, if you don't fucking comply with this, I will become a one. I will become one.
I ain't got
to
shit
spite
to
your
lose.
ass.
Yeah, for real. So several of the accused actually later recounted their experience with the touch test. There's a direct quote that says, "We were blindfolded and our hands were laid upon the afflicted persons, they being in their fits and falling into their fits at our coming into their presence, as they said. Some led us and laid our hands upon them. And then they said they were well and that we were all guilty of afflicting them. Whereupon we were all seized as prisoners by a warrant from the justice of the peace and forthwith carried to Salem." End quote. The Reverend John Hale explained how the touch test. I keep wanting to say the touch taste.
The touch taste.
The touch taste.
Let me flick my tug on your skin.
That's my combined massage parlor, sushi bar, restaurant name. The touch taste.
Okay.
Taste of touch. Maybe that one's better.
Yeah. Okay.
So
continue, please. Stick to your day job, Caitlin. We're podcasting.
Who? Did you just use my proper name? My Christian name?
All right, bitch. Come on.
So Reverend John Hale explains how the touch test supposedly worked. He said, quote, "The witch, by the cast of her eye, sends forth a malefic venom into the bewitched to cast him into a fit, and therefore the touch of the hand doth by sympathy cause that venom to return into the body of the witch again." Two things about that. One, I appreciate the random capitalized letters. Two, I wouldn't get caught because I ain't got no damn sympathy. So
Right.
I ain't got no sympathy for
I
you,
love
baby.
that. I want that to be a drag queen name. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Malefic Venom.
Malefic venom. And then there's just like a quiet clap. Malefic venom and bewitched. Yeah. Yep. So as we can see, these are all very subjective tests or evidence.
I think it's
Very
pretty
weak.
concrete.
Just fucking, yeah.
I think it works, man.
Solid.
That's the exact quote someone said in Salem. They're like, "What do you think of these?" And they're like, "I think it's good."
Seems legit to me. She was just, she was in the floor rolling around. She was spitting. She was sweating. She was cussing. We all could just see right on up her skirt, and I kind of liked it a little bit, but I didn't want to admit that I kind of liked it. But she was just rolling around in the floor, having all kinds of convulsions and just having a fit. She was fit to shit, honey. And then that old witch came along, and she laid her hand on her, and honey, she was stiff as a board. Wasn't nothing wrong with that child. So she's a witch. I think it worked. You go ahead and hang her.
If a bitch did that and she stopped convulsing, I'd just punch her in her face.
Trigger a seizure. Nah, she ain't fine. Look at her. She's all fucked up.
Just throat punch that bitch. Just cause her to...
Right?
She's good.
I mean,
See?
at that point, you're fucked anyway. One of the big witchcraft tests historically. Oh, that one came back around for you.
It did. It came back a second time around.
Came back around. No, but one of the big witchcraft tests that I didn't choose to talk about necessarily in this particular episode because it was less a part of the Salem Witchcraft Trials than other witchcraft trials. Historically, the swimming test was used.
Yeah.
Which is the one that everybody has kind of heard about, where they throw you in a big old pool of water, and if you swim, you're a witch, and if you drown, well, bye. But that was less, that played less of a role. Right. That played it. Well, if you sank, you went on home to Jesus.
Right.
Or evil snakes.
Isn't
or,
that just the life of just women in general, though, in reference to society and men? Like,
there's a very ready metaphor in a lot of this. Because ultimately, if we think about what a witch is as a symbol, we're just like smart, intelligent, funny, sexy women who like to help other women heal and grow and, further themselves. And we are threatening to the male ego. We're threatening to the patriarchy. We're threatening to all of that. And so there's a very, for me, obviously this happened in the 1600s, and, there are a lot of things that are not specifically about witchcraft that this is grounded in, which we will get into shortly. But there's a very clear parallel for me with how women in general are persecuted.
right.
Particularly women who prefer to keep to themselves, who are very knowledgeable, who do sort of possess a lot of quiet power, that are threatening, very threatening to the way that our society is structured.
Right.
It's changing nowadays, hopefully. But there's still a lot of room to grow, for sure. So.
Right.
So, did you want to get into some of the...
So it's funny, though, that you
Background
mentioned, the women as victims, but, a lot of the women were the ones doing the accusing.
Yeah, so just to clarify a point, when I say patriarchy, I don't necessarily mean just men. I mean everyone who feeds into the system of patriarchy that exists.
Right.
And that certainly applies to a lot of the women that we see
Right.
in Salem who are accusing others of being witches. They are, they're very much part of that system.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like you see Tituba accusing people of witchcraft and people jumping on the train to like heal Tituba from her like tormentors, right?
Right.
Instead, Tituba is the accused.
Yes.
Sarah Good, who is essentially a homeless woman, is the accused.
Yes.
And you have the people doing the accusing being either children or women who are higher up in society,
Right.
sort of.
Yes. And what's interesting is that you almost have this sense of like, you either confess and live to point the finger at someone and accuse someone, or you deny it and you die.
Right.
Or get put into prison.
Right.
So you have a lot of that was going on as well. And you can sort of unpack the cause in different ways. There are several different theories, but one that we really wanted to focus on is one that we kind of both believe as the main cause behind all of this. Like I said previously, Salem was a very divided community. I mentioned that you had Salem Village, which was a poorer, more agrarian. Is that the right word?
Agrarian. Yes. I love that word. Agrarian.
Agrarian-based community. And then you had Salem Town, which is, like I said, what we know as modern-day Salem. Salem Town was more commercial and wealthier, so you can begin to see how that can begin to stir the pot, so to speak. These frustrations often led to people of the West accusing the people of the East of witchcraft. In fact, there was a large feud between the Putnam family of the West and the Porter family of the East. And indeed, a lot of the accused had ties with the Porter family. And there was one person who was instrumental in really setting this whole craze in motion. And I say one person because it's not all on one person.
Right.
It's a bunch of people that's really to blame. But you have several key figures like Cotton who all played their role. And Reverend Samuel Parris was one of them as well, of which the Putnam family had been a strong supporter of. So the two families had locked horns over land disputes, but things became hotter when it came time for Salem Village to pick a new minister in 1689. The Putnams in their camp wanted Reverend Samuel Parris, a conservative minister who did not tolerate unorthodox views on religion. They got their wish, but in 1691, just months before the hysteria, the Porter camp managed to take control of local affairs and took steps to cut Parris's salary. So, getting into Reverend Parris a little bit. In 1680, Parris moved to Boston with his two slaves, Tituba and her husband, John Indian. He married Elizabeth Elridge that year, and the couple had 3 children, Thomas, Betty.
Sorry to interrupt. Like, is his name just like flat out racist? Like, did we just...
I don't know. That's
I'm
how he
really-
was described. It was John Indian.
All right.
And in every way that it was just, he's always been described as John Indian from what I could tell.
Okay.
So,
Cool. All right. Just wanted to point it out.
Yeah, that's how it has been. Yeah, his name John. We'll call him John.
John.
So, in 1686, Samuel Parris began serving as a guest minister and interim pastor for several Boston churches. And in 1688, Parris entered negotiations to become the new minister in Salem Village. And he accepted the position and became the official minister in July of 1689. And I'm going to read an excerpt here, but Parris had not...
heavy this episode. All of our primary source research.
Except... So, Parris had not enjoyed a moment's peace since the commencement of his ministry in 1689. And sidebar here, this whole minister issue had been a thing. They had been through several ministers prior to this. A lot of it was that the people did not want to pay the minister's salaries. So the minister was like, deuces, I'm out.
Bye.
Don't blame them. Right? So they had some issues with ministers. They've been going through some things, right? So he came into this between the warring factions in Salem Town and Salem Village. And instead of confining and channeling social fears and tensions into revival and covenant renewal, as his colleagues were seeking to do, Parris inflamed local rivalries by declaring that if ever there were witches, men and women in covenant with the devil, here are multitudes in New England. By March 1692, he was convinced that witches had infiltrated the churches, including his own Salem congregation. In a sermon on Judas Iscariot, he declared that, as in our text, John 6:10, there was one devil among the 12 disciples. So in our churches, God knows how many devils there are. Such preaching offered a powerful and dangerous release for social and political tensions that had been brewing throughout the previous years. It encouraged the villagers to purge their feelings of frustration and guilt by locating and destroying witches in their midst. In many cases, these witches were individuals who had run afoul of Parris and his key clan of supporters, the Putnam family. So once Samuel's daughter, Betty, and his niece, Abigail, began their fits, you mentioned Mary Sibley coming in with her witch cake business. That really sort of set the motion of beginning to point the finger at who it was. Or like, you know what I mean? Like that whole, like, she's a witch, you're a witch, we're all witches business, right?
She's a witch, you're a witch, they're a witch, and we're all witches. It worked.
Yeah, it did. So eventually the girls accused Tituba, the Parris' own slave, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. Tituba herself eventually confessed and was spared hanging, but also became one of the accusers. I think that it's interesting that Tituba was spared, being that she was a slave of Reverend Parris. It causes me to give side-eye a bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that because of that connection.
Right, like, why was she spared?
Her.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because I've read some theories that say, not putting this forward in truth, but putting... They say that the village believed, or the way that the narrative was later shaped, is that Tituba brought the witchcraft over from her native country. Yeah, from the Caribbean. And that, you know, that's sort of, that she was the origination point. So it's interesting that she is spared if she is the origination point. In that, not insinuating that she was at all. However, it is interesting to consider that, you know, people of the Caribbean have their own unique practices, and especially unique religious practices. There are some very unique religious practices in the Caribbean. I have friends who are from there, so I have like witnessed this and the history of it. And that is definitely something that in English, or formerly English, basically still fucking English, puritanical society, those sorts of practices could have been perceived as witchcraft. But to your point, I think it's very interesting that Tituba is the character that we see kind of protected, I guess you would say, by Reverend Paris.
And Reverend Paris himself, before moving to Boston and Salem, lived in the Caribbean.
Okay.
So he lived there with his family. He had his father's estate was in the Caribbean. So his family had a history and had ties to that. So you can't tell me that whatever religion that Tituba may have had or whatever her practices were, he wouldn't have been aware of that. Because he had lived there, he lived in the Caribbean. He was bound to have had some sort of connection or awareness of that.
Right.
And she was his slave, so he allowed her. If she was, he allowed that into his household. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a little weird to me that a man who is so devoutly against witchcraft would have allowed a slave who practiced something other than that into his home.
Well, there's obviously a couple caveats there.
Unless, of course, she hit it or whatever.
It could be a hidden thing. That is a thing when you enslave a whole nother race. Yeah. They are forced to then sort of I don't want to say subjugate, because it's actually a really clever and super smart way of preserving your cultural beliefs and your religious practices. They kind of mask it. We talked about this a lot in the episode that we did on voodoo, of how Afro-Caribbean religions like Candomblé, they take their religion, right, and then lay Catholicism or, Puritanism or what have you, Protestantism on top of it. And then they sort of like secretly practice their religion. Yeah. In the guise of this other thing. So it could have been
a mixture of
something
other
like
things.
that.
My point being is that I don't think he was stupid or he was ignorant to the fact. You know what I mean? Right. He had
You don't think that he bought in to begin with to the fact that this was actually witchcraft.
Right.
You don't think he bought the ticket.
Yeah, and I just don't. Yeah, I just think it was, I just think that it was a device that he used. Like, I think he was aware of what her religions were, may have been, whatever they were, and if it was something that was other than Christianity, I think he knew that and used it as a device to further whatever this plot was. And because he owned her, he didn't want to lose his slave.
Right.
She got a certain level of protection.
Right.
From him.
Right.
That's what my personal belief is on this, because it really just starts to really take on the hysteria. So you have people you've got these families who are quarreling, and I'm going to accuse this person because of something that they may have done or because of something that they may have said to me. Mm-hmm. You have the poor, like you have, who was one of the other girls who was the accused, Mercy. Yeah. Who accused someone of witchcraft because she had been not a slave, but a servant, and apparently had been beaten by them. Mm. So it was never really stated like, oh, I'm going to accuse this person, but you have to think like there becomes a level of power that you have over someone. And if someone has wronged you in any sort of way, even if they haven't wronged you, but if you feel like they have, or if you want to get back at somebody, you now have that power. And I think that's a lot of what the girls were feeling. They felt power in a society that, even as women as well, and young girls were already feeling like they had nothing. Yeah. This gave them power. Right. And I think they were young, like we said, so I'm not trying to like
Well, that's
paint them
that's sort
in
of what
a-
happens when you give someone, most of them, certainly not all, but most of the accusers are young. You know, you got
Right.
kids who are 9, 10. If you give kids this kind of attention and you give them this kind of power, I mean, it's almost like, what do you expect?
Right.
And the adults in the situation did not act as adults. Instead, I think they used the
it.
situation to manipulate,
Right.
and
So
to get sort of what they wanted out of the
on
situation.
both on both sides, you have the girls who are feeling this power and they like it, and you have the adults who recognize that and are not being adults and are using the girls to,
Further their own ends.
their own means.
Right.
I mean, you have even so much as like if we get into the cases of Rebecca Nurse, who was of Salem town, and Martha Corey, who was of Salem Village. These were two very prominent, like very religious women. They were nothing like Bridget.
Right. I
Nothing
mean, Bridget's
like her.
kind of a gimme, right?
Right. They were nothing like her. They were the exact opposite.
Bridget sounds like she actually might have been a witch. I mean, I'm just saying.
Possibly. But these were women that were the
No
exact
shade
opposite.
to you, girl.
So the moment that they became accused,
Right.
it was like,
Whoa.
anybody can be. We can name anybody.
Yeah.
And it's important to note that fact because at this point, it has now become more than just the two families. Because now you have people on both sides who are becoming accused of witchcraft.
Right.
So it has consumed everybody. And poor Mary, she simply just doubted the girls.
Yeah.
She doubted the girls. She was there during the initial trials.
She doubted them because they were fucking 9 and 10 years old.
Right.
And they're sentencing people essentially to death.
Exactly.
Of course she doubted them.
So because-
Everyone in Salem should have doubted them.
But because she had those doubts and she voiced them,
Right.
you had the
All of a sudden,
mother
she's a
of one
witch.
of the children of Ann Putnam,
Yep.
Ann Putnam Jr. and her mother, she didn't like that. So, a witch you are.
Right. Right.
And it's just, it's insane. It's insanity. The whole thing was insanity.
Yeah. So you mentioned that we're at this point, the children are way gone on a power trip. The adults are, using it to sort of get the ends that they want, and
Right.
we're out of control, and everybody's being accused. The motivation here, I think Kitty and I are pretty much in agreement on this. There are a lot of different theories as to what happened, and there's even some weird theory about like a particular type of fungus that was growing that was causing the girls to have all these episodes and fits. If you really look at it, if you look at who's accused, if you look at the order of how they're accused, if you kind of look at the order of events, it's pretty clear to see that the children are being manipulated, and that the adults are basically concerned with economics.
Yes.
This whole time. This whole thing is economically motivated. It perhaps didn't start that way, but it definitely ends up that way because the property of a confirmed confessed witch became the property of the state and was redistributed according to the state's will. And in a lot of those cases, it's redistributed to victims who, were victimized by the witch.
Right.
Right? So I accuse you of being a witch, and then I take your shit, and you die.
Fucked up shit,
Right?
man.
So the whole thing is economically motivated. It was a land and property grab. So our beloved Giles Corey then perhaps knew what he was doing when he requested more weight when he was thrice asked to confess to being a witch. Because Giles Corey did not plea, he died within full possession of his estate. Deliverance Corey, his daughter, would at least have her home and her land, if not her father. Today, Giles' placard in Salem simply reads, "Pressed to death, September 19th, 1691.
Yep.
Later on in the witch trials, when things start to wind down in about May of 1693, the exclusion of spectral evidence by Governor Phipps is called for. So the evidence as far as like, oh, Kenny as a ghostly specter appeared in my room, that sort of shit was thrown out of court. Interestingly, Governor Phipps ruled that spectral evidence be removed from the trials or excluded from the trials right around the same time that his own wife's name coincidentally started being tossed about in connection with witchcraft.
Huh.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Talk about side-eye earlier. Now I'm giving major side-eye.
So right around the same time that the governor's wife's name starts getting kicked around as far as being a witch, that's around when he decides to rule that spectral evidence not be allowed in the trials anymore, and this pretty much brought a sharp decrease in convictions. Due to this reprieve by Phipps, there were no further executions at that point. And of course, his actions were very vigorously opposed by William Stoughton, the lieutenant governor, who everybody knew was a prick anyway, and who Cotton Mather had basically boosted to power on his father's credence.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that his father had actually denounced spectral evidence prior to that.
Increase Mather, from Jump Street, Increase Mather was way more, I'm not going to say that he was not... I'm not going to go so far as to say that he was against the witch trials, because he definitely, I think his voice was one of the voices of the Boston ministers that they asked for advice from in the very beginning. But he was always 100% from the beginning against spectral evidence.
Right.
He did not fuck with any of that. And he even said that he would rather 10 witches go free than one innocent be killed in the name of being a witch.
Right.
So Increase Mather, pretty straight up dude. His son was a fucking douchebag, and part of the sort of Cotton Mather is like one. I don't want you guys to think of him as like the one guy who like fanned the flames. He's indicative of a bunch of ministers who were exactly like him, who called for this shit, who got off on this shit. And you fucking know that this dude was just in his room just dreaming about some perky witch nipples. You know that he was just fucking like dreaming about like shaving their bodies and looking for the fucking devil's mark. You know he was about it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He was just jerking off.
He was looking for that third tit, honey.
He was. He was. You know, it vexed him so.
So... yeah, that's a lot. The Salem Witch Trials, it's a lot to unpack, but I think it's definitely important that we remember how this happened, why it happened, so that, you know, these things don't happen again, right? Which is why we learn history.
Because as, you know, we like to keep things spooky, but this isn't just specific to witch trials, right? I mean, if you look at this situation that our country is in right now, everybody's super divided. The extremes are very extreme. There's not a lot of people in the middle, but there are a ton of people on either extreme, right? And people are radicalizing because of that, because people are in an echo chamber on both sides. And, you know, that sense of heightened emotion and that just certitude that you are in the right and the other party is in the wrong, and you are glorified by God or by justice or by the state or by who the fuck ever to persecute the other side. That sort of idea is very central to the story. Right. So I think it is universal. It's not just a witchcraft story. It's not, you know, I mean, interestingly, like I said, most of the people that they accused, nobody that they accused is a confirmed witch, right?
Right.
And we joke about Bridget, you know, maybe she was. She sounds pretty fucking cool. She was definitely witchy, right?
Witchy, yeah. But, she was eccentric. We'll call our lady eccentric.
Like, I'm into it. But,
she was you in the Salem Witch Trials.
Right. But she, this is sort of a universal story. This can happen with anything. It's not just a witchcraft story. It's not just a puritanical Massachusetts story. It's really indicative of what human beings can do to each other, even still.
Yeah, definitely.
So.
Definitely. And it was very, it was very humbling because Katie and I have both been to Salem and visited. I think we were there on Halloween, actually, a couple of years ago.
We were.
And we actually were able to visit the memorial of the victims of the witch trials. We got to see the land where Giles Corey was pressed. Mm-hmm. And actually just recently, and this is what's crazy to me, is that only recently did the city of Salem actually create or acknowledge the location of where the witches, quote, witches, had been hanged. Because when we went, there was there was a lot of guesswork on where Gallows Hill and speculation on where Gallows Hill was. Yeah. There is a Gallows Hill Park, but
that's not the site.
That is not the site. Yeah. I actually did a shit ton of research before we left.
Yeah.
Because I was so heavily invested in this and wanting to know where they were hanged. And turns out it
was behind the CVS.
It was a Walgreens.
Oh, was it a Walgreens?
Yeah.
Turns out it was behind
a Walgreens.
And you can get 20% off Walgreens with the code WIT.
No, but and then I think it was because we were there in 2014, 2015, something like that.
Yes, yeah.
And it was only in 2016 that the city acknowledged where they were actually hanged. Mm-hmm. So now there is a memorial that you can go to at the actual Gallows Hill. Yeah, so I would love to go back and see that because, when we went, it was nothing but just dead space behind a Walgreens.
Right.
And I would just like to pay my respects there because that's the body. Because if you were accused of witchcraft and you died, they literally just threw your body into the ravine. And
yeah, well, that quote that I read, they threw a bunch of them in there together, and they weren't even fully buried.
Yeah, and it was left to some of the relatives to come and sneak and steal their bodies back in the middle of the night and give them a proper burial. And I think that it's important that that the city of Salem didn't even really formally apologize until I think it was the 50s.
Yeah.
The 50s or 60s or something like that.
1950s or 60s.
Yeah.
For reference.
Yeah, sorry. 1950s.
To clarify.
Which is ridiculous to me.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where a lot of the people, obviously you have people who were accused who were outside the system, but a lot of the people who were accused were part of that same system that created that,
Yeah.
And so it's difficult because you're apologizing in some senses to yourselves. So.
Yeah. And a couple years after that, they were, their names were cleared after the whole incident. And their families were given restitution, but they were never really given a formal apology, which I think was important.
Yeah.
In closure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, any of your thoughts on Salem and your experience there?
I've emptied. In being in Salem.
Yeah.
I thought you were asking about the witch trials. I was like, no, I've reached the end of my notes. I've emptied my thoughts.
No,
it was a very cool place. It was very chill. I enjoyed it a lot. I can't wait to go back. But it was very humbling, I will say.
Yeah.
And particularly there was no surprise. It should be no surprise to you guys at this point, but Giles Corey has always been a big, a big focal point, I guess, for me in this story. And he's always been very dear to my heart. I've always felt drawn to his story. And when we went and saw the monument, on his placard, on his stone, some relatives, I guess it was people who had traced their ancestry back to him, had left a note for him, and they called him Grandpa Giles. And they wrote, it was clearly a child, because it was written in like childish handwriting. And so they had written like this letter to their Grandpa Giles, you know, thanking him for, you know, being honorable, basically, and for, you know, for not allowing himself to be forced to confess.
Right.
And for me, that's the biggest thing, is like with his daughter, like I just feel like that he was very courageous in that moment. So, yeah. I mean, he's just like the one motherfucker who is just not down with the bullshit. And he's like, I'm not going to fucking say that I'm a witch.
Right.
And I'm not even going to tell you that I'm not a witch, because fucking you're absurd. I'm literally not going to answer you. You are absurd.
Yeah.
And that whole pressed to death thing, that wasn't quick.
No, not at all.
It took 2 days.
Not at all.
For him to die. So it was pretty awful.
Yeah.
So
I definitely recommend anybody, if you have the chance to visit Salem, definitely do so. Like you said, it is a humbling experience, and I think it's important that you sort of have a community, a modern day witch community who is sort of
adopted these people.
Yeah, they have adopted these people, and it's, yes, I mean, there's a lot of like touristy things, and all of that stuff, but it's empowering to see witches and witchcraft sort of take back Salem and use it to, and, you know, and just use it for themselves and for their craft and their religion, and to be able to practice it openly.
Right. I don't even know that I would say to take back Salem, but I kind of see Salem's whole journey with this witch trial as, you know, eating the poisoned apple, right? So we think that we're this city on a hill, which is, you know, what they were striving to be, in the words of a very, very famous English minister. And then they go through this crisis, and they just absolutely fucking tear each other apart. And at the end of it, you know, they know that they're capable of that, and they see what people are capable of. And at that point, I think they've reached a place that witches, real witches, kind of come from, right?
Yeah.
Because real witches are, you know, those who seek knowledge, perhaps even beyond, like the moral veil, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of see the city, once it goes through, or the town, the region, the incorporated area, once it goes through the witch trials, it's kind of on the other side of that, and it has that knowledge. It has that knowledge of darkness. And so at that point, I think it's cool, you know, that witches gradually kind of take it over as a place of importance to them. Yeah. Because a lot of, you know, everybody knows that a lot of the people who were accused were not witches. Potentially all of them were not witches in the true sense, but they were at one point in their lives, especially the people who were accused to begin with, they were outcasts. Right. And if there is one thing that the witchcraft community understands, it's outcasts. Yes. So I think it's really cool to see them sort of adopt the victims and lift them up in the way that they have. Yeah. So it's very cool. Yeah. And I'm very glad that all of that is now out of my brain. A history episode.
History episode. History of witches.
Oh, history of witches. So you guys know what to do. If you want to get more Haunted Heart in your life, you can visit us on the interwebs. On Twitter, we are at The Haunted Heart. On Instagram, we are at The Haunted Heart Podcast. And on Facebook, if you will search The Haunted Heart Podcast, you will find our closed group. We have it closed so that you can talk about all the spooky, weird, macabre shit that you want to talk about that your family doesn't necessarily need to fucking know about. That's why our group is closed. If you request to join, we will approve you immediately and induct you into our fabulous Facebook family. And if you think that we deserve a little bit of Monet for all the research and shit that we put together on this episode and lots of our other episodes, or if you just want access to all kinds of cool bonus content, audio and visual shit, head on over to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Haunted Heart, and you can join one of our tiers there. It starts at like $1. So if you want to get on that action, feel free to.
Yes.
And I think that's pretty much it for our updates. If you are not on the Facebook group, you should really join the Facebook group. The Facebook group is pretty fucking cool. Some days it's the only thing that keeps me alive.
True. Yes, I'm here. I'm here for all of it.
And Kenny's beautiful face.
Yeah. All right, guys. So
you know what to do. No, I was trying to like double it with you, and it wasn't fucking working. No. It didn't work out.
All right, guys. So until next time,
stay spooky.